This is John Gilroy from the Federal Tech Podcast.
And this is Dave Monnier with Team Cymru.
Today, we're going to talk about how to understand threat intelligence for federal systems. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast, where industry leaders share insights on innovation with a focus on reducing cost and improving security for federal technology. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcast.
Welcome to the Federal Tech Podcast. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Our guest today is David Monnier, Chief Information Officer, Chief Evangelist, and Team Cymru Fellow at a company called Team Cymru. David, how are you?
I'm great, sir. Thank you. How are you?
Good. We're talking about threat hunting and threat intelligence today. And I think anyone who's listening to this has read articles. They know it's very important, especially in the federal government. In fact, just last week, these folks over at CISA talked about bolstering, there's the word there, bolster threat hunting. So David, why in the world bolster threat hunting? Haven't we done this for years and years and years?
So we have certainly been aware of the idea of threat hunting. And I think, for listeners, it would be a good idea for us to frame, what is threat hunting? Where does this fit in? And threat hunting, when you think of it in traditional terms, when kind of security policies and whatnot began, events would happen like this. You get compromised or you get attacked, and hopefully you catch that attack and then mitigate it somehow. But typically that isn't how it happened because people weren't actually able to detect the attack stage. And typically they would catch the misbehavior of a already attacked, already compromised device. And then they would go into remediation, right? And that's expensive and unfortunate because there's typically, a scope of impact effort that has to go on because how do you know that only this one system was compromised? So then along came the idea of, let's start to be more proactive. Let's start to understand what could be done to us. And that's where kind of the idea of, red teams started to emerge to kind of test security postures, to see how your policies work, to make sure your controls were applied correctly and things like that. And then as time went on, though, people started to realize, it would be great to be able to actually try to better understand adversarial movements and what adversaries were doing. Now, in the federal space, that capability is certainly available, in particular through some of the federal agencies that you can request support from. National Security Agency, for example, if you're, critical infrastructure, you can say, hey, we have this and how can you help us, better understand this? They run these programs that are absolutely fantastic. But the problem is you have to start with something very specific, right? And you get back a very specific answer. And that's all, legal obligations, Title 18 and whatnot suggest this is how all this has to happen. So what that leaves is kind of a space for being able to quickly assess an event. Say you have an IP address and you want to know, well, what else has it done on the internet? Who is it doing to? And giving that type of context. And that's where we come in. And we would say that we've evolved threat hunting into what you could actually describe as threat reconnaissance. And threat reconnaissance is like I described. So you've identified some source of malice that's affecting your infrastructure, affecting your network. And you want to understand context. Is this, is this a random drive-by where it's, somebody's just spraying the whole internet looking for a specific vulnerability? Is this a industry-specific thing? Like, are they targeting just federal agencies? Which, again, kind of suggests more nefarious than, say, the, average just exploit everything on the internet. Or is the thing that probed you talking to nothing else but you? Are you the only thing that they seem to be attacking? And that level of understanding is game changer, right? In particular, imagine it's, Friday, 4:30 p.m. This event happens. And now you need to know, am I working over the weekend, or is this something that I can triage and understand that, hey, this was random. We're not being specifically targeted. So what we do is we make available what we call pure signal, but you could think of it as, collection, a data lake of largely IP metadata, but also some other data sites that allow you to illuminate the sources of events and understand what else they're doing. And one of those things that what else they're doing is who's managing that infrastructure. And then you can pivot off of that and understand what other infrastructure might they be managing. And this would allow you to create a true proactive security posture and apply, as you see the adversary standing up new infrastructure, you can already update your border policies to, say, deny that traffic. And that's just one of the applications. There's also great use cases around third-party management. So supply chain observation. You could look into your supply chain to see if they appear to be compromised. You can use it for asset discovery of your own infrastructure. As networks have grown over time, we apply our Pure Signal products for that exercise as well. But really, we provide global visibility towards, a lot of defense use cases where we have pushed the ability to apply policy in a defensive status far left of the event stage. So far to the left or far, left of bang, if you will, and less so helping organizations break out of that kind of reactive approach to security.
Yeah, before we started this interview, I told you I had a little background in radio and, I have to spell things out. For example, your website's kind of hard to remember, but I'm going to spell it out for our audience. It's team-cymru.com, and you get all kinds of information there. And what's easy to remember, though, is a report you folks have called Voice of a Threat Hunter. So website hard to remember. It'll be in the show notes, but Voice of a Threat Hunter. I remember that report. Maybe download it.
Thanks for that, John.
So what's it all about? What's the Voice of a Threat Hunter all about, and why should our listeners download it?
Yeah, well, it dives into in much deeper detail what I just described, the ways that we have kind of evolved the landscape for a defender, allowing them to have visibility in near real time on adversarial actions, and it has moved the concept of threat hunting, into the next era. Frankly, evolutionary, not just revolutionary. And the capability, again, the resources available in particular in the federal space are vast and massively capable, right? But that all takes time. You have to fill out requests. You have to wait for some type of response. And all of that takes time. And time is the only resource you can't get back, right? You can make more money. You can print new drives. You can make more of everything but time, right? So having access to instant answers, nearly instant answers that provide situational context related to adversarial actions is frankly priceless. So that's all kind of spelled out in the Voice of Threat Hunter. And you could think of it as, it's not just attestation, in the Voice of a Threat Hunter part, it's not just attestation, but it is a very good paper that kind of highlights how people should be thinking about proactive security in the modern world. And
what people are thinking about is podcasts. And you're a guest on my podcast. And David, if I'm not mistaken, you have a podcast as well. Tell our listeners about your podcast, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a podcast called The Future of Cyber Risk.
And by the way, that's easy to remember. You can go to Google and type that in, can't you? The Future of Cyber Risk. Bang, we get to David's podcast. Finally, something easy.
That's right. Yeah, no, that's right. But the podcast is really geared towards kind of demystifying the positions of, risk managers. So that's, your CISOs, your CIOs, your policy and framework advisors, all kind of the full gamut. We have a varying range of guests from kind of the technologists who executes up to kind of the policy advisors to law enforcement who see through the process to the end. We have had guests from around the world. North America and Europe, I think, have largely, taken over the numbers wise, but we've had guests from around the world. And what we try to do is, like I said, we try to demystify what is risk management in the modern world. Legal obligations around the world, in particular around certifications and things like that, and regulatory concepts. they often have requirements for specific titles to appear in organizations where there's simply not enough people to kind of fill those roles. So there's a lot of people that meet kind of educational requirements, but not the experience requirements, who find themselves in these situations where, suddenly they're trying to understand, well, how do I be a CISO? I worked for the policy office previously, and suddenly they have to understand all these new things. It can be overwhelming, can be daunting. So what we try to do is we try to bring in SMEs that can provide insights and, if not defang the topics, at least demystify them. And the objective being, leave them with some idea that, hey, maybe I've never done this before, but this has been done before. And I can tune into the Future Cyber Risk podcast and hear how somebody else did it and, what I should be thinking about and what perspectives I have. And then even if the listeners aren't in those situations themselves, it's been very informative for folks to just understand what are the thoughts that these people in these situations go through. So it helps them to kind of understand what is the security ecosystem and what what responsibilities and roles and thoughts and philosophies do all the people who have in that hierarchy, how are they, what lens are they looking at the world through?
Yeah, many of these people attend events like Black Hat, and I think you folks started Black Hat. Mm-hmm. And just put this in perspective. I mean, there are other organizations that do threat hunting. So what's the differentiator with you folks? Why should our govies listening to this? Well, maybe I'll listen to this podcast. So what's your differentiator, David?
Well, first of all, it's absolutely zero hype. So it's not a lot of commercials. It's not, no one can pay to get on the program. It's not positioned like that. So it's not, whatever you want to call that, edutainment or, I forget what the term is, but it's not a placed ad. It's, I'm not an academic. I'm a Marine Corps veteran who went to the Marine Corps right out of high school. I happen to be born with a natural aptitude towards understanding how digital systems work. I've worked for 27 years now in the industry. But as a result, I don't communicate with lofty language. I don't communicate with marketing buzzwords. I communicate very frankly, simply, because that's the lexicon that I could draw from. And that's my favorite chance to use that word, by the way, is when I talk about how I don't have a strong vocabulary. But anyway, but no, I would really like to think that what we do is we produce a very easily digestible, zero pressure, media, and our podcast is easy to listen to. It would be as if you were joining us, for a cup of coffee, and you happen to be sitting at the table between two cybersecurity experts, having a discussion that you can actually feel like you're part of. But having no hype is definitely, I would say, the leading thing.
So what about your company itself?
What differentiates us is our global access to insight. We've set out for 20 years or so now to facilitate services to the internet community as a whole. So think the organizations that actually make the internet work. And in return, we have unparalleled access to the data that the internet produces. So we can answer more questions about badness than anybody else. I know there are other people who make that claim, but I will tell you that those folks are also typically our customer. But we are the source. We have products that deliver this insight to people, both via a UI UX. So like think of a portal, but also via API. And it's, near real time threat intelligence that is applicable to, like I said, provide context that really nobody else has, unless for perhaps, you work for the Department of Defense somewhere. But otherwise, we have more visibility than probably anybody in the world.
And so what people normally engage with you, they'd have some kind of a platform, a digital risk platform. Is that what you call it? Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's correct. So we have three views We have, as far as digital risk goes, we have an attack surface management platform that's been popular in the federal space. It's called Pure Signal Orbit. Then we also have 4 threat hunters. We have Pure Signal Scout, which is a very quick answer, nearly instantaneous contextual view. Not a deep dive, however. It's, hey, these are the certificates that this host is. This is where we've seen them. This is a basic view of kind of what the conversations that we've seen this host having with other hosts in the world, and what is the malice potential for those conversations. Again, our focus is primarily around maliciousness. So our data does have a tendency to have a bias towards bad. We don't catch a lot of false positives because we don't start by looking for them. But we do, our collection methodology is kind of a total information awareness approach, if you will. So we collect everything, not just TCP/IP or UDP/IP or whatnot. We work with a data format that operates at the IP level, but it doesn't just pull those 3 IP protocols out. We look at all potential 255 IP protocols. So we can see tunneling protocols. We can see things that stand out, but often avoid policy devices. So, your firewall certainly blocks TCP/IP, certainly blocks TCP/UDP, certainly blocks ICMP, but sometimes, they don't pay attention to, for example, GRE. And nation state actors are aware of that. So they will sometimes make use of these alternate IP protocols to conduct exfiltration, to maintain persistence, things like that. So our visibility includes all of that type of stuff. But you can see that in Scout, get a very quick answer that via its API, you could hook it up into whatever front-end tool your analysts may be using, whether it be Maltego or, potentially even something like Palantir or something like that. If someone wanted to help us work with that, if they had that requirement, we could certainly figure out how to hook our APIs, in that direction. And then lastly, we have what you could think of as our flagship, which is Pure Signal Recon. And what Recon is a deep dive. So think of it down to granular visibility of all of our upwards of 45 or 48, something like that, data sets that are visible in the platform. So Scout and Recon working from the same data. Scout gives you an amalgamized kind of short, pithy answer, and Recon gives you, the nitty-gritty. All of the data types, in particular in Recon, are pivotable. So what that means is like, let's say you look up an IP address, that IP address has an SSL certificate. Well, where else has this SSL certificate been seen? A click of a button, bang, you can see where else it's been seen in the world. It helps you understand because, it sounds crazy, but criminals are lazy, whether they work for a foreign government, or whether they work for themselves. So they will reuse deployment images and things like that. So even that small method that I just described of looking for SSL certificate reuse, in particular self-signed certificate reuse, can oftentimes lead you to other pieces of nefarious infrastructure that you were unaware of, and you should update your network policies to keep them from being able to reach you as well. So those are kind of our 3 primary things. And then we also have threat intelligence feeds that are available as well, where if people just want, just give me a list of IP addresses to block. These are very popular amongst ISACs and a couple other federal offices where they just had a requirement to purchase those. I forget the name of the program now. It's evading me, but it's similar to basically we're in the book, we're in the catalog. The feeds offering is, I believe we'll soon have Scout and Recon in there as well. But there was a federal program that's put together for sourcing, and our feeds, people can just open up and order it, and it'll show up. We've gone through already all of the federal procurement exercise to get in the book, so easily available and easily applied. But those are kind of our four prongs product-wise. In addition to that, we do all kinds of effective community outreach and no-cost services as well. I would encourage people to take a look at the community section of our website. We are kind of a staple service of the backbone of the internet as a whole, and can be for your network as well.
You said API and kind of like a flash, and kind of flashed. I've interviewed several people about cybersecurity, and some people argue, and maybe you can look at your 20 years experience and see if this is true or not. What people have told me is that the attack vector now is not necessarily a firewall, but the API itself. Sure. Do you see attacks on the API itself as part of the, your observations here?
Yeah. So, there's another number of avenues of threat there. First of all, weak credentials, whether those credentials be, a login password or whether they be some type of shared secret. I have seen very poorly implemented instances of those. In particular, because there's no web interface, there's no interface typically, which, by the way, HTTP, every time you use a web browser, technically you are using an API, right? They just happens.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Yeah, that's probably correct.
Yeah. It's a protocol within a packet, so by definition, arguably that is one of those. And what we're seeing today is kind of a resurgence of kind of the same pitfalls that happened previously, right? So poor assumption. Well, who's going to talk to this without knowing it's an API? And who's going to, then if they do talk to it, who's going to know how to talk to it? Because, APIs are typically have some kind of schematic way to communicate with them, right? You have to ask your question in a certain format. Well, again, just like HTTP, these things are often published, right? So an organization makes their service available via an API. The API has a schema document so that you can write your tools on the other end. That document gets in the hands of somebody that it shouldn't. If the API stream itself is not hardened using some kind of crypto, SSL, what have you, then maybe people attack it just plainly. But then once people do get authenticated access to it, a lot of the same early application pitfalls that people used to see, and I'm talking in the 90s, early 2000s, where it was very easy to escape, using escape character attacks and things like that, where you could access wrong parts of the system and things like that. We're seeing a lot of that happen again. And that's why I think people are, for lack of a better word, down on APIs. But I have bad news for them. They may not like it, but just as HTTP as a protocol had to, earn its way through the world and has been abused umpteen times in past in history, API methodologies are going to be as well. So people need to kind of grow up, adopt a modern API approach. And most of all, from a business perspective, they have to understand that users in the marketplace insist to have these APIs, because you can't have 50 browser tabs open if you're all some type of if you're doing software as a service via some kind of platform. You can't have everybody logging into 30 platforms. It breaks the workflow. It's not it doesn't create for like a continuous process, thought process as you're working through an incident, right? If you have to keep switching windows and undoubtedly you'll have to use the restroom, you'll need to get something to drink, the workday will end. I mean, there's a bunch of scenarios, right, where you have to interrupt that workflow. And if you don't keep track of exactly what tab you were in and things like that, it breaks. So the modern workforce, in particular, security analysts, cyber analysts, they prefer to use a front-end tool that a single pane of glass, if you will, that can reach out to multiple data sets and then bring that back, do a correlation, and present to you what matters to them. And that's just reality. Whether people like it or not, who are out producing software and delivering services via API, you're not going to be able to tell the market how they must use your tool. It's just not going to work that way anymore. They already typically have their own method that they want to access data. It may be the platform that is authorized for use in their infrastructure. So maybe it's completely out of their hands. But almost certainly it is, if it's not mandated to them, it's the tool interface that they prefer to use because they're most efficient in it. Well, again, I'm not necessarily promoting any of these products, but for example, Maltego, I've used for 20 years because I prefer to use it, and it talks via API to any data source that I want to write a plugin for. Now, granted, I'm hacker nerd person, so I can write these plugins, but there are lots of tools out there, in particular in the federal space, that are already existing. And these analysts in these types of locations are typically working through a pane of glass that they're accustomed to. And your data source, if you're in the marketplace, has to plug into that, not the other way around. And that's just reality of modern cybersecurity.
Yeah. Great take on API. I'm sure there's a lot of truth in there. Let's stick with acronyms. 3-letter acronym topic. Topic is 3-letter acronyms. There is a podcast in town. You got a podcast, and the podcast in DC called Feds at the Edge. And everyone's talking about the edge and edge computing and COVID. People are remotely coming in. They're at the edge. Now we have sensors on trains. We have sensors on satellites, all kinds of edge. Mm-hmm. So this IoT, does that stand for the Internet of Threats? Or so what about IoT in your world? I mean, how has that wrecked your world?
So the Internet of Targets.
Targets.
Yeah. So, we're uniquely positioned. We see the Internet as a surface of IP addresses, right? And they are predictive. Every IP address that has ever existed and will ever exist is already a known quantity. So in our case, we look at it from the outside in. We look at almost everything from the outside in, whereas an edge policy mechanism would look from the inside out. Inside out has its advantages in relation to granularity of events within your enterprise. Obviously, that's important. Inside out has its advantage in time, right? Because once you see it, it's typically, it's on your network. So we're talking millisecond responses to be able to do things. But it has its massive disadvantages because what the attacker is doing other than talking to you, you don't know anything about. So our outside in approach allows us to look for IoT in the wild and look at who is probing them, what else they're probing, this type of context. So IoT to us, was an expected outcome of making the IP addresses. We knew they would be used at some point, and we knew to be looking for them as they did. So when IPv4 exhaustion came around, where the address space, really started to get much smaller, available IPv4 address space is like rock bottom right now. And to us, though, that's a blessing. It gives us more known objects to potentially look at and see what they're doing. And understand, what is the surface of the internet at any given time. Now, IPv6, obviously, we've just started to scratch the surface of the, potential address space for it is absolutely, galactic in size. So, we look at this space as well, but, it's a little trickier. You have to pay attention to, what prefixes have been assigned and try to, focus your discovery on those assignments. But as far as IPv4, as IPv4 address space exhaustion happened, frankly, it made us, kind of looking at the surface of the internet easier because there weren't so many potholes of empty address space that you have to, skip over. But IoT is definitely the future. But I will tell you, if you put your devices on the internet, make sure that you are in communication with your vendors. Make sure that you are on every possible announcement list that they have so that you can know when there is an issue with those devices. I have to tell many people over and over again that these devices typically are designed for a very specific use, and they do not have the update tempo of, say, your Apple laptop, which is designed for very general use, and therefore they have to be much more rapid and ready with security patches. But IoT devices statistically and historically are lagged way behind on that front because as kind of the trickle-down effect happens, there is a very long development cycle going into putting patches into the IoT wild, because if these devices crater, if the patch causes problems with these devices, oftentimes lives are at risk, so in particular around operating technologies, OT. But IoT stuff is just as critical. Like you said, imagine, if the train's controller systems were to fail, that could be, terrible situation. So that patching process, that remediation process takes a very long time relative to kind of, general computing. So if you are responsible for IoT infrastructure, it's imperative that you take all of that very seriously, because by the time you are notified that there's a problem with one of these, not counting, special access announcements, because there are obviously critical infrastructure groups within the federal government where you can get that information in a skiff and start to get in front of that type of stuff. But generally speaking, in particular in civilian government work, that's not the case. And you're just a regular customer, though your mission is maybe arguably more important than, say, a dentist's office or something, which is seemingly arbitrary. You're not seen by the vendors as that much more important because, there's only just so fast they can work. Because like I said, they have to do all this regression testing. They have to do all of this stuff. So the sooner you can find out and apply updates to your IoT infrastructure, the better, because a lot of time has likely already passed. And unless you have a Wayback Machine and, can go with, what's his name, Sherman and Mr. Peabody and go back in time, you're going to be already behind the gun. So that's my advice for IoT. Hopefully not too scary.
Yeah, not too scary. We're going to wrap it up here. Can you give us a quick little prediction here for the next few years in your business? I'm kind of a negative person. I think there's going to be an event and people are going to start scrambling, but I've seen a lot of things. So where do you see your industry heading in the next 4 or 5 years?
Industry-wise, I think from internal aspiration, there's going to be a huge application of AI, looking to streamline what you could think of as problems too big for humans, typically. I mean, there's, you have your mega humans who can, like your Rain Mans, who can just see these things, but that doesn't scale, right? So as far as general cybersecurity workforce goes, people will be looking to apply artificial intelligence to do anomaly detections, correlation, stuff like that. But you'll still need a human being to determine causation. I think that's going to never go away. So I see that as happening. I am also in the camp of you. I think that we are looking in a societal term. I have a bad feeling that we are rocketing towards some destination that no one has really thought about. We are digitizing absolutely everything. I was in the OPM leak, for example, and my OPM content dated back so far back that I had no recollection of even seeing a computer when I was in the Marine Corps at the time. So somebody had gone and taken analog paperwork and digitized it at some point, and then it was breached and accessed, by people outside. So this is the kind of push for digitization. I understand the ideas behind digitization, but what I don't get the feel is that anybody has really contemplated, what are the bad outcomes, right? And I'm not even necessarily talking about adversaries. A corona mass ejection could easily, one sunburst could easily cause massively disrupted situations. And when you couple that with a massive reliance on technology that I would argue the majority of society has no idea how it works. In fact, if you go to ask them for things that they use every day, like email, if you say, how does email work? They'll use words like click and open and stuff like that and send. But you'll never hear them mention SMTP. You'll never hear them mention IP. Never. But yet those are the actual aspects of it. And there's a whole galaxy of detail inside SMTP. But yet everybody's super reliant on these things. If you look at an automobile, you could go ask people, how does an automobile work? And there's people who could at least point to the motor and say, these are the motors, these are the tires, this is the exhaust. They have some understanding of this thing that they rely on, right? But when it comes to digital and electronic aspects of it, I don't think that we're prepared for them being gone from our lives suddenly. And I don't think that we understand them well enough to actually be able to measure that risk to our life and to our society. And I'm with you. I have a feeling whether it be some type of cyber attack, which there's high chance of, or higher than average, I would say, given all of the political tensions that are afoot in the world, or just plain technological failure. I could see that happening sometime in the future. But luckily, the good news is there's plenty of folks who do understand these things and are working on it, though we don't scale as effectively as we could. And that's why hopefully folks will reach out to us and see how we can help get them in the fight to understanding what adversaries are doing to them and their network.
That sounds like a true Marine. Get them in the fight.
Hoorah. That's right.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time here, unfortunately, David. You have been listening to the Federal Tech Podcast with John Gilroy. I'd like to thank my guest, David Monnier, Chief Information Officer, Chief Evangelist, and Team Cymru Fellow at Team Cymru. Thanks, David.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Federal Tech Podcast. If you like the Federal Tech Podcast, please support us by giving us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.